Chapter 2. Fight. "Come on," Keenan urged quietly, already moving for the door. We burst outside, the sudden sunlight blinding after the dim light of the inn. The cobblestones gleamed white-hot, reflecting the midday glare. For a moment the world felt too bright, too sharp, as though the city itself was holding its breath. Turning left, we hurried towards the market, only a few buildings away. Behind us came the sound of armored boots striking stone. Brom catching up with long, purposeful strides. His expression was grim, his jaw set like iron. "I'd like to know more," he said, his voice low but steady, nodding toward the market. Grateful for his presence, we quickened our pace. The market square was chaos. Milton, the farmer who sold his produce daily, sat slumped on the ground, clutching his shoulder. His wife, Linda, scrambled to gather spilled apples and carrots, her hands shaking as she tried to simultaneously right their overturned cart. The shattered remains of their table lay scattered like bones. We rushed to help, lifting Milton to his feet. His face was pale, twisted with both pain and fury. "What happened?" Brom demanded, his tone commanding, already taking charge. Linda's voice cut in, sharp and trembling. "It was those evil men. They came through demanding information. We told them we didn't know anything about their cursed stones, and they shoved him down, smashed our table, and walked away like they owned the place." Brom's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. "Which way did they go?" Before she could answer, a scream tore through the square. Shouting erupted from the blacksmith shop, followed by a crash of metal on stone. Then Franklin, the blacksmith himself, staggered into the street, a dagger buried deep in his chest. His eyes found ours, wide with shock, lips parting as if to speak, but only a wet gasp escaped. He collapsed at our feet, lifeless. The sounds of destruction still echoed inside the shop. We charged through the open doorway. The air reeked of blood and smoke. Inside, the two sailors from the docks loomed over a town guard struggling to rise. One sailor's shoulder was split open, blood pouring freely, yet he moved as though pain meant nothing. The other turned toward us as he heard us enter the shop, his lips curling into a sneer. "Well, well," he growled, "if it isn't the little boy who doesn't know it's rude to stare." His laugh was jagged, cruel. "Time to teach you some manners." His eyes glowed brighter now, a hellish red, and the air itself seemed to thicken with dread. A palpable aura of fear pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. The guard staggered upright. It was Jeffries, one of Keenan's and mine's childhood friends. His face was bruised. Blood trickled from his mouth, but his green eyes burned with defiance. "You're both under arrest," Jeffries declared, his voice heady despite the tremor in his body. The wounded sailor barked a laugh. "Come here, runt. I'll break you in half." Jeffries raised his short sword, but he was hopelessly outmatched. The brute charged, and at the same instant the other sailor lunged at me. I barely had time to lift my arms when a blur of steel and fury slammed into him. Brom, the king himself, driving his shoulder into the man's chest. The sailor flew backwards, crashing into a rack of tools with a howl of pain. At the same moment, Keenan stepped in front of Jeffries, his voice calm but commanding, ringing with authority. "I am a paladin. You have one chance to surrender, or I will stop your unlawful actions by force." The sailor hesitated, his sneer twisting into something darker. "A Noctari paladin? You should be on our side." With a hiss, he lunged. Keenan met him head-on. His shield struck like a hammer, slamming the man into the wall with bone-cracking force. Before the sailor could recover, Keenan's blade flashed, one swift, merciless stroke, and the man's head struck the floor with a sickening thud. The room went still. Keenan turned, his eyes cold. "You get one chance," he said to the remaining sailor. The man's grin widened, wicked and unafraid. Slowly he pulled a small device from his belt. It began to hum, glowing with a sickly red light that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. "You can't stop us all," he taunted. Brom's voice thundered. "Everyone out, now." We bolted for the door, dragging Jeffries with us. Behind us, the sailors' laughter rose, high and manic, echoing through the shop. Then came the blast. The explosion ripped through the street, a roar of fire and stone that shook the very bones of Grissom. Windows shattered, carts toppled, and the cobblestone themselves cracked beneath the force. Heat seared my back as we dove for cover, the world dissolving into smoke, screams, and the ringing in my ears. When I lifted my head, the market was unrecognizable, choked in dust, littered with debris, and echoing with the cries of the wounded. As the dust settled, Brom rose and called out, "Is everyone okay?" Jeffries, Keenan, and I nodded, shaken but still standing. From deeper in the city, the clash of steel and cries of battle grew louder, echoing like a storm rolling in. We knelt beside Franklin. It was too late. He was gone. "I need to get back to my daughter," the king said, his voice taut with urgency. With no immediate threat pressing in, we followed him, hearts pounding, weapons ready. As we turned onto the main street, an elf moved swiftly out of the shadows, bow drawn. He glanced at us and gave a curt nod. Rieger was an elf who felt more comfortable in the wild than among people. An adept outdoorsman, he often spent his time with us growing up, keeping us out of trouble. Incredibly stealthy, his green eyes never missed a detail. "I think some of the guards have turned," he said grimly. We broke into a run, heading for Grog's Inn. Brom pushed the door open. Torchlight flickered across the wreckage of splintered chairs and overturned tables. Bodies lay scattered. 2 sailors, 3 townsfolk. He scanned the corner where they'd been sitting. "Not here," he muttered, "but they left in a hurry." The door creaked again. We tensed until a familiar halfling slipped inside. He walked straight to the king, whispered something urgent, and vanished. "They're headed to the barracks," Brom said. I frowned. Safest place in theory, but if Rieger's right, they could be walking into a trap. Brom gave a dry chuckle. "If Victus is with them, they won't be prepared for what they're about to catch." I grinned. "Sounds good to me." Keenan and I exchanged a look, then bolted out the door. The guards' barracks, which doubled as an armory and prison, stood atop a gentle rise surrounded by homes and shuttered shops. As we climbed, the sounds of combat grew louder. A deep guttural voice echoed through the air, speaking in a language none of us recognized. We rounded the final corner and froze. In the center of the town square stood 2 towering demons, each at least 10 feet tall. Their red skin shimmered in the firelight, wings twisted and unfurled, claws flexing, hooves grinding into the stone. Their black eyes locked onto us with cold malice. And there, standing alone before them, was Victus, shield raised, sword in hand, laughing as he hurled insults. Behind him, pressed against a building, huddled a group of children with their schoolteacher. The king's daughter stood among them, a halfling at her side. He trembled but held his ground. The square was in chaos, wounded guards and townsfolk crying out, steel clashing, blood staining the cobblestones. To the side, guards fought one another, and atop the steps of the meeting house stood an old, scarred man, clutching a glowing orb. He chanted in a tongue none of us understood, and before him a shimmering portal grew larger by the second. A wounded guard gasped from the ground. "You must stop the old man. He's opening portals. That's how the big ones got in." Jeffries broke into a sprint towards the steps, but snarling imps leapt into his path, claws flashing. I froze. Too much chaos, too many cries. I didn't know what to do first. Then Keenan's voice cut through the noise. "Help Jeffries and stop the old man." Snapping into motion, I drew my short sword and axe and sprinted towards Jeffries. As I reached him, I saw Rieger loose an arrow at the old man on the steps, but it struck an invisible barrier and dropped harmlessly to the ground. Meanwhile, Keenan charged the towering demons, the king close behind him. Jeffries was being swarmed by imps, small, grotesque creatures with sharp fangs and beady eyes. Their stubby wings barely kept them aloft, but they were relentless. Death by 1,000 cuts. One lunged for Jeffries' throat, and I caught it midair, slammed it to the ground. It glared up at me, screeching, "You will die, human filth," just before my axe split it in 2. Another imp darted toward me. I braced for impact, but it dropped lifeless beside me, an arrow lodged in its skull. Rieger appeared at my side, swords flashing as he cleaved another in half, grinning. "No honor in these little beasts, is there?" he said. I chuckled, dispatching the last of the imps near us. Together, Jeffries, Rieger, and I charged the meeting house steps, determined to end the old man's dark ritual. But the barrier held. We couldn't reach him. Frustrated, I shouted to Keenan, "You know anything about invisible shields?" A little busy, he called back, dodging a massive war maul swing by one of the demons. The portal's growing. We need to shut it now. Keenan slid aside, dropped his weapon, and clasped his hands together, his eyes closed in concentration. The larger demon seized the moment, raising its maul high. No, I shouted as the hammer began to fall. Victus lunged in, shield raised. The maul crashed down with bone-shattering impact, driving him to his knees with a grunt of pain. The demon paused, stunned that Victus still lived. That hesitation was all Brahm needed. He leapt into a half-wall, then sprang onto the demon's back, driving his sword deep into the base of its neck. The creature staggered, blood gurgling from its throat, eyes wide with shock as it collapsed forward lifeless. The second demon roared, turning towards Brahm, who struggled to free his blade from the fallen beast. Victus tried to rise. The demon raised its weapon, then stopped. A small projectile had struck the back of its head. It turned slowly, black eyes landing on the king's daughter, standing defiantly with her hands on her hips. In a voice both soft and strong, she said, "You leave my daddy alone." Time froze. Smoke curled from the demon's nostrils as it locked eyes with the little girl. Ignoring Victus's taunts and Brahm's shouts, it gave a cruel, savage smile. "I will kill you and all your little friends for your insolence." With terrifying speed, it swung its maul into the building where the children were huddled, collapsing an entire stone wall. The girl cried out no and threw herself over the children, shielding them with her small body. The king, abandoning his sword, launched himself at the demon in a frenzy, punching, stabbing with a dagger, doing anything to bring it down. Victus drove his blade deep into the demon's leg, but the creature, consumed by hatred, didn't flinch. It laughed as it slowly sank to its knees. Brahm stepped in front of it, hand outstretched. "Victus," he called. With a solemn nod, Victus tossed his sword to him. Tears welled in the king's eyes as he gripped the hilt. His voice trembled with grief and fury. "For my little girl," he whispered, and drove the blade deep between the demon's eyes. The creature let out a final shuddering gasp before collapsing into the dirt. Keenan sprang to his feet. "Found it," he shouted, voice ringing across the square. He began chanting in a foreign tongue, and the shimmering barrier around the old man flickered, then collapsed. Rieger didn't hesitate. His bowstring snapped, and the arrow flew true, striking the old man squarely between the eyes. The sorcerer dropped without a sound. The portal behind him convulsed, its edges fraying. With a final violent swirl, it collapsed inward and vanished. The battle's fury began to subside. Screams faded into groans. The streets lay broken, littered with dead and wounded. Then we saw them, Victus and Brahm, clawing through the rubble where the king's daughter had last stood. We ran to help, bracing for the worst. But as we reached the wreckage, someone spotted a faint shimmer beneath the stone. A magical barrier still intact. Hope surged. Together we cleared the debris, revealing the children huddled safely within a protective dome. The king dropped to his knees beside it, voice trembling. "Sweetie, can you hear me? If you can, release the barrier." The shimmer vanished. The little girl collapsed, unconscious. Brahm caught her before she hit the ground, cradling her with tears in his eyes. The other children stirred, dazed but unharmed. Keenan exhaled, shaking his head. Well, that was impressive. As I scanned the wreckage, a cold realization struck. Gamriel was with the council. If the city was under siege, they'd be next. I turned to Keenan. He was already watching me. "Gam," I said. We broke into a sprint, Rieger close behind. Inside the council chamber, we heard a small voice cry out, "More are coming." I couldn't help but laugh. "No, it's just us, Millhouse." His head popped up from behind an overturned table, eyes wide with relief. Millhouse, one of Grissom City's 5 councilmen, was always nervous, always expecting disaster. The room was a mess. Several guards lay dead. One wounded man was being tended to by Renard, another councilman. Renard was quiet, his past a mystery, but he'd proven himself steady. He glanced up as we entered. "Looks like you missed the party," he said, tying off a bandage. "We had our own," I replied, forcing a smile. Gamriel stepped forward, his hand wrapped in a bloodied cloth. I grabbed it instinctively. "What happened?" He shrugged. "Knife wound." Then, lowering his voice, he gestured toward the far corner. Wilhelm sat bound, glaring. Ancelot stood over him, sword in hand. "He was in on it," Gamriel said. "A traitor." I looked at Keenan, who was checking the fallen guards. Gamriel continued. Villaheim came in with 2 guards, asking about the black stones. When we said we didn't know anything, he called us liars. One of the guards went for Millhouse. I intercepted the blade, hence this. He raised his bandaged hand. The other 2 tried to stop me, but Matt, he nodded towards the injured guard, helped Ancelot and me take him down. Anger surged. I thought of the demons, the children, the destruction. My fists clenched as I stared at Villaheim. I wanted to strike him. Keenan's gaze was locked on him too. Then he turned to Gamriel. Want me to interrogate him? Though Keenan now wore the mantle of a paladin, he still deferred to those in charge, very different from the defiant youth I'd once known. I chuckled quietly, remembering Gamriel. Gamriel caught the look and grinned, reading my thoughts. That won't be necessary, Gamriel said, his voice calm but edged. He started talking the moment he lost. Something's blocking his memories, not magical, or at least not that I can tell. We'll either wait for it to wear off, or, he raised his voice slightly, just kill him. Villaheim whimpered. I told you everything. They came to me asking me about the stones, promised me money to help find them. I didn't know they were going to try to kill you, his voice cracked, desperate. I suddenly remembered the inn and told Gamriel about Grog's absence and the wreckage we'd found. Gamriel gave a knowing smile. In an emergency, Grog and Throm head home to protect our house. I frowned. Why the house? Gamriel offered one of his trademark enigmatic smiles, the kind that signaled he wasn't going to answer. Well, it's our home, isn't it? He said, with a mischievous glint. Before I could press further, Brom entered with Jeffries and his entourage. For the first time, I saw all 5 halflings together. They moved quickly, sweeping the room for threats as Brom approached. He glanced at me, then at Gamriel. Well, this sure is a mess. He reached for Gam's hand, then paused at the sight of the bandages. Chuckling, he said, just can't stay out of trouble, can you? Gamriel grinned. Sometimes I get bored with all the meetings and politics. They shared a laugh, but Brom's expression soon turned serious. So you know something? Gamriel's smile didn't fade. Maybe, but there's a lot I don't know, and I don't like that. Brom shook his head. You not knowing makes me nervous. You and me both, Gamriel replied. Jeffrey stepped forward and gave the council a grim update. Half the city guard was either dead or deserted. They were critically understaffed. He explained that Anthony, the captain of the guard, had refused to cooperate. When the traitors tried to turn him, he spat in their faces. Though outnumbered 8-1, he fought fiercely, killing 2 before they overwhelmed him. Gamriel's face darkened. Well, looks like you've been promoted, Jeffries. Jeffries blinked. I'll do my best, sir. Gamriel placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. I know you will. Start by figuring out who we have left. Organize shifts around the gates and the harbor. Just then Keenan stepped over and gently took Gamriel's hand, beginning to heal the wound. Gamriel smiled. You're already rather good at that. Didn't burn or anything. Burn? Keenan asked, puzzled. Gamriel smirked. Every time Throm healed me, it always burned. Keenan chuckled. Yeah, it's not supposed to do that. Gamriel blinked, then burst into laughter. Oh, Throm is going to get it next time I see him. We all laughed with him. Then, regaining his composure, Gamriel said, I'll send a runner to the dwarves, see if they'll lend us troops while we regroup. Jeffries looked surprised. Do you really think they'll send help? Like most of us, he was curious about the dwarves beneath the mountain. They rarely ventured out, and seeing them in force was almost unheard of. Gamriel smiled confidently. Some of them owe me favors. I don't see why not. As we spoke, several halflings slipped away. I watched them from the corner of my eye as they melted into the shadows. I smiled to myself. I was glad they were on our side. Wait, Gamriel said sharply. What about their ship? The one they came in on. He turned to Jeffries. Take a few men and check the vessel in the harbor. Yes, sir, Jeffries replied. Already moving. Gamriel raised a hand. Don't board it. Quarantine and lock it down until we can send a proper team. Jeffries gave a sharp nod and headed towards the door. Gamriel turned to the council. We need to search Villaheim's quarters. Anything useful, anything hidden, find it, then toss him in a cell. He looked at me. If you can head home, let your uncles know it's over for now. I nodded and turned to leave, but Gamriel caught my arm and pulled me aside. His expression was grave as he pressed several black stones into my hand. "Give these to them," he whispered. "No one else sees them." I slipped the stones into my pocket, masking my surprise with a nod. As Brom, Rieger, and Keenan and the council continued their discussion, I slipped out quietly and made my way down the cobblestone street towards the house. But as I approached, a strained unease crept over me. My steps slowed, a chill ran down my spine, an inexplicable fear I couldn't shake. Then a voice rang out, "It's Alvar!" The fear vanished instantly. Grog stood in the doorway, gripping a massive battle axe. I'd only seen him wield it once before, during the wolf attack. The sight of the stout dwarf braced with a weapon nearly as large as he was enough to terrify most, but I couldn't help but laugh. "Did you feel fear, boy?" Throm called, brushing past Grom with a warm grin. "So that was you?" I asked, smiling. Throm nodded, still working on my aura control. Grog muttered, "Magic nonsense. Just give me my axe and stay out of my way." Throm and I chuckled, but as I reached for the stones, Throm's expression shifted. "Not out here," he said, voice firm. "Inside." I nodded and followed them in. Throm was the eldest of the three dwarves. His white hair was pulled into a thick ponytail, his beard neatly kept. His sharp brown eyes missed nothing, always calculating, always alert. Despite his formidable presence, Throm was gentle at heart, protective of all living things. I'd only seen him raise a weapon once, but the memory of the wolf battle made it clear he and Grog were terrifying when roused. The house was warm and solid, thick stone walls, redwood beams supporting the angled roof. A large hearth glowed at the center, casting soft light across the room. A sturdy table sat near the fire, built for four. A small seating area occupied one quarter, and four modest bedrooms branched off the main room. It was snug, familiar, and lovingly remodeled when I came to live with them. Inside, I pulled out the stones. Grog and Throm exchanged a glance, their faces darkening. "Do you think it's starting?" Grog asked quietly. His subdued tone caught me off guard. I'd never seen him like this. Throm's reply was grave. "It's getting closer. I never thought I'd see it in my lifetime." He took the stones and slipped them into his pocket. I couldn't hold back anymore. "What's going on?" I asked. "What are these stones? Why are people hunting them? Who are the men with the red eyes, and why are they attacking?" The two dwarves exchanged a long look. "We need to tell him," Grog said. "I know," Throm agreed, "but Gam should be here. He deserves a say." Grog grunted. "Then we better do it soon. If it's begun, we don't have much time." I waited, heart pounding, desperate for answers. Throm gave me a wry smile. "I hate to send you running again, but we need Gamriel here. Tell him to come back soon. We'll speak in private." Frustrated, but knowing they wouldn't say more, I shrugged. "All right, I'll go get him." I left the house at a brisk pace, heading back towards the council chamber. The streets had come alive with people, sweeping debris, tending to the wounded, and trading stories of what just unfolded. Every few blocks, a cry of grief pierced the air as someone found a loved one among the fallen. I felt the weight of their sorrow, but my thoughts were tangled in the cryptic exchange with my uncles. The black stones, the urgency, the secrecy. I reached the council chambers just as the final threads of discussion were wrapping up. Without pause, I walked straight to Gamriel. "Grog and Throm want a private meeting," I said. He nodded, unsurprised. "I figured they would," he replied with a weary sigh. His eyes studied me, calculating how much of that meeting I'd be allowed to hear. Brom stepped forward. "I'll head home, see what I can dig up. If I can spare any men, I'll send them your way." Gamriel nodded. "Much appreciated. We'll keep pressing the traitor while you're gone." He cast a cold glance at Wilhelm, who whimpered, "It was only business." Before anyone could respond, one of the halflings burst through the door, breathless. He rushed to Brom and whispered something urgent. Brom's face drained of color. Without a word, he turned and strode out, his daughter Invictus close behind. Keenan and I exchanged a glance, then followed. Outside, the halflings pointed towards the horizon. There was a column of smoke rising in the direction of Burke, Brom's home.